Yes, yes.
You're good to go.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the April 16 event of the Arch Fun and Free Lecture Series. I'm Connie Haas-Zuber. I am the Executive Director of Arch, and we are very proud to welcome the people who are here in the Shields Room of the History Center in Fort Wayne with us, and the people who are live streaming the event. I sent out 8 links, and that could be, who knows how many people that could be. But welcome to the people who are live streaming also. The first thing I do every event is to say thank you. The little piece of paper that the people here in the room received, one side of it starts out saying thank you. And it informs everyone that this lecture series is supported by funding that Arch receives from Arts United of Greater Fort Wayne and the Community Foundation of Greater Fort Wayne, who with the support are investing in history for our future. Equally important for the long history of art, which was founded in 1975, is the support of our members and donors, without whom art wouldn't even exist, and without whom we would not get the ideas or the support or the interest or the help that makes programs like this possible. Arch has always been a small organization, and the people, the volunteers, the members, and the donors who are with us in this work have always been what has made the difference in what we're able to do to inform and educate and advocate and serve the community. Over that nearly 50 years, I will note that this organization that started out pretty much serving Fort Wayne has grown and evolved to now serve the entirety of Northeast Indiana. We're very proud of that. And we turn then to the other side of the little piece of paper that I gave you, which includes a handy QR code, which I always half jokingly tell people I know it works because my son got it for me. And this is the invitation to everyone. Many of you are familiar to me, and I know you're already, so to speak, members of the club, if not the movement. We'll call it the movement. But it's an invitation to everyone who is hearing this presentation today to discover what's going on with art, because art is at work, and we're doing things, we're busy, there's lots going on, and the more people that are involved in supporting us, the more we can do, and that would be a good thing. We invite you to explore our website, archfw.org, and click around, because there's realms of historic preservation resources on there. You can learn about architecture, you can learn about neighborhoods, you can learn about all sorts of things if you click around deeply enough in there. And to learn more about the benefits of historic preservation for individuals, neighborhoods, and communities, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. And also, and most importantly, this is an invitation to connect with Arch as a member and add your energy and resources to our ongoing advocacy, education, preservation, restoration, documentation, and research. These are the key strategic goals of Arch, and we're working on them all the time as our top priorities. So you can, if you like, scan the QR code and go there now. You can do it at your leisure. You can call the office if you want us to do all the clicky stuff on the computer for you. Also, if you're already a member, thank you especially, and feel free to take this little piece of paper along with you and share it with somebody else you think might be glad to be part of all this. Now we're going to turn to today's program, which is a very special one in my estimation. All of us are aware that the real estate market everywhere and in Fort Wayne is very hot right now. One of the places in Fort Wayne where it is very active is in our beautiful historic West Central neighborhood. When I learned earlier this year that West Central's Neighborhood Association president had the numbers to document what was going on there and was thoughtfully considering and analyzing what this meant and what the outcome of all this might be, I thought, this really has to be on a lecture series this year. So not only did Tyler Bowers kindly agree to share the research he had already done doing graduate work at what is now PFW, but he updated it. So we have very timely information and analysis from, I think, just the right person to share it with us today. So I'm glad to introduce Tyler Bowers, who is presenting today the Economics of Historic Preservation and Revitalization in West Central. I turn the microphone over to you, Tyler.
Thank you, Donnie. And make sure it's audio good. You guys all hear me? Well, I want to thank you guys all for coming out here today. I know West Central wouldn't be where it is today without this large community-based, amount of people who just care about the neighborhood, care about seeing it progress, seeing it advance, and preserving the historic character of it. So I thank you guys all for coming out here today to hear my presentation. It was about 5 years ago to the day that I moved back to Fort Wayne after spending time in Bloomington, Quincy, Illinois, and Columbus, Indiana. And I had grown up in Fort Wayne, but up on the north side by North High School, kind of out in the suburbs. And the extent to which I probably came downtown, in the late 1990s, early 2000s, would maybe be for Three Rivers Festival or for something at the embassy. And then we'd go back home and didn't really explore or spend much time in downtown Fort Wayne. But when I moved back to Fort Wayne back in 2018, I had about a month where I was in between jobs. I came back for a job in the insurance industry. And so in the evenings, I would drive Uber just to kind of relearn the roads. It was fun to kill time, see different parts of Fort Wayne I hadn't seen before. And it was late on a Friday, and I was driving to pick someone up on Wayne Street. And I'd never been on Wayne Street before. And I'm driving down it, and it's dusk, and all the homes are lit up on the inside, and there's the Castle Gallery, and these big, huge brick mansions. And I thought, wow, I have never seen this side of Fort Wayne before. Where's this? I've seen Forest Park Boulevard before, but I've never seen, these beautiful historic homes that are tucked away in this part of Fort Wayne before. Because I knew I'd driven through Jefferson and Washington, but I'd never seen it. And I thought, I just want to get involved and know more about this. So I started going to volunteer events and neighborhood cleanups. And 5 years later, I'm the neighborhood president on the Historic Preservation Commission and leading the Home and Garden Tour, and up here today. So it's just been something I've been really passionate about, and it's been great to learn more about the neighborhood and meet so many great people who have been involved in the neighborhood's history these past few decades. So, to get started, I kind of wanted to give a brief, if you can say brief, it's 180-year history of West Central, kind of from Fort Wayne's founding to 2010, which kind of tends to be the turning point for West Central. And so this is a map from about 1846, 1845 of Fort Wayne. The population is about 4,000 people. Fort Wayne becomes incorporated as a city in 1840. And the major economic driver of that would be the canal system that came through Fort Wayne that allowed cargo and transportation, things to be hauled, I think, from the New York and the St. Lawrence Seaway all the way down to Mississippi, with Fort Wayne being the connection hinge point on that. But you will see West Central. West Central is basically west of Calhoun Street. So if you're not familiar with Calhoun Street, that would be on the west side of the current courthouse. And it's everything west of there, and then south of St. Mary's. But this is kind of Fort Wayne's initial founding. And then back then, 1840s, 1850s, West Central basically stopped at Rock Hill Street. There was no College, Nelson, or Garden Street. It was mostly kind of the wilderness. So when you hear people call West Central the Old West End, it was really the west end of town where town stopped. And you could cross from the west of east side of Fort Wayne in about 15 to 20 minutes. But here's kind of zooming in on that, you can see where Rock Hill is really that end street. But on the canals, it was a major driver of Fort Wayne's industry, and that's why you have a lot of the big Fort Wayne industrialists have their big grand mansions there on Wayne and Berry Street, because as they made their fortunes, you wanted to be downtown, but off of the main downtown center. So this would kind of almost be, I guess, the suburbs of today, because it's the furthest you can get from the center of the city, but still, be within close distance. There's an example of that canal boat that would transport goods up and down the street. Fort Wayne Methodist College we built there, I think, in the late 40s, 1840s. Large bird's eye view map that was drawn probably in the early 60s. And you'll see, I think that's Jefferson, Washington Boulevard. There's a Emmanuel Lutheran Church, the beginnings of St. Joe Hospital, and then there is the Methodist College. And so the Methodist College was there, I think, from 1840 to 1890. And then they moved out of Fort Wayne down to Upland, Indiana, where they became Taylor University. But when that then, left town, I think for financial reasons, and then moved to Upland, that cleared space to have a lot more homes be developed in that area. So, some of the older sections of West Central are going to be east of Rock Hill Street or south of Jefferson Boulevard, but you'll have a lot of newer homes, these 1900s, 1910, be built in that section where the college was. So, that's what that area looks like today then. You can see St. Joe Hospital, the you move on 50 years from when that other map was where, Fort Wayne was basically downtown East Central and West Central, and you start to get by the late 1880s, 1890s, the Nebraska neighborhood on the far left side, Bloomingdale neighborhood along Wells Corridor starts to come, and fully develop. East Central starts to develop, and then the Broadway and Fairfield corridors. And by that point, Fort Wayne's population has grown tenfold to about 44,000, and the canals are no longer the major kind of economic driver in the city. You've got the railroads, and it's the railroads that are in the same location today as they were about 120 years ago. They had a railroad kind of go over where the canals were, and then they've got that kind of elevated track on the south side of town that splits kind of West Central, the northern section from where the Electric Works GE campus is. So, around the turn of the century then, Fort Wayne becomes this big manufacturing, industrial hub with things like the Wayne Knitting Mill and Electric Works and the Packard Piano Factory, and kind of our position along the rails and the river allows just the city to kind of exponentially grow to where you get to like the 1940s, the old electric or the General Electric plant, employs 10,000 people. It's a huge driver in our area. But the decline in the West Central neighborhood, you can start to pin right there in like the 1940s, 1950s. So here's a shot from the top of the Lincoln Insurance building. That area now is where a lot of the parking lots are for Parkview Field. But you can see where that was all residential areas when that downtown area was just really, really packed and thriving. So, the decline can start to be pinned on the changing, if you had money or, were middle class, upper class, the changing attitudes or the changing tastes of where you wanted to live in town, some of that driven by, redlining or, where the new economic developments were happening. So for like that northern section of West Central, you can see they kind of tagged it as being near factory soot, near smoke, and then it was classified kind of as a declining area. And then for the southern section of West Central, which would be Wilt Street, Jones, Lavina, Sweeney, Stofflet, it was still, they classified it as like a mostly white working class neighborhood, but one of the factors they pinned on was it was near kind of the black part of town, and was one of the drivers of the economic decline of the time. So you can see some of the just the factors or some of the thinking that went into why this area started to decline, and then the big benefactors of where West Central residents started to move to were kind of the suburbs of that time in the 1940s and 50s. Would be the Wildwood Park neighborhood, Old Mill, Southwood Park, and then Forest Park Boulevard, Kinsey Boulevard. That's where, you know, kind of the maps or the banks would show the really good investments would be moving or building in those areas. So that's why then you see other kind of great grand homes in those areas as people would flock from downtown to those areas. So, you know, if you had one of those big grand homes on Wayne or Washington Boulevard, that's 4,000 square feet and it's got all this ornate brick and wood detail, but it's the 50s and 60s and people don't want to move into West Central, or at least people that would typically be purchasing a house at that price, you know, you can no longer sell the house for what you had it for. And so just the property values start to slip. You know, maybe one person can't buy one of those big manor homes and keep it up, and you need two or three, or they split it into a duplex or a quadplex. A lot of that historic character and detail as these houses get chopped up into individual apartments. You know, the other thing too would be some houses just go into decline because if one person lives there, the cost to upkeep and maintain all the wood siding, slate roofs, aging electrical, aging plumbing, it becomes cost prohibitive. And then no one outside, you know, in the market is going to then buy your house and then put enough money into it to fully fix all of the issues with an aging house that's about 100 years old by that point. So a lot of these houses just start to get boarded up. A lot of them, you know, again, are split into quadplexes or triplexes. And spoke with Glenn Ellenberg, who owns the Cheesecake Factory, or who owns the Purple Mountain Cheesecake, because I think he's lived in the neighborhood maybe since the 80s, and he talked about they just had like a lot of hippies moved into the area. A lot of the house behind him, he said, had like 15 or 18 one-bedroom rooms that you could rent for a week or a day or half a day, and it just kind of became a lot of areas became a real rough spot. And you know, I think Mike Anderson said, if you came into Fort Wayne on a bus or on a train and you got dropped off downtown, you would basically walk west on Wayne Street or on Berry Street or Washington until you found a house that had like a plaque or a sign that said, you know, room for rent, $10 a week, $5 a week. And it just kind of, it didn't become like this either working class or upper class neighborhood by that point. It was, a lot of sections of West Central were pretty rough. And that continued on from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And you still had areas that had, you know, individual homeowners living. And so not every space was rough, but just a lot of the upkeep and maintenance of a lot of the homes really slid in decline over those like kind of 50, 60 years. And that gets us to, you know, the past decade, 2011 to 2022. And, you know, just here's a picture, an example. I think this is on 700 block of West Washington Boulevard. You know, it's one of my favorite things to see where probably in the 50s, 60s, 70s, someone took one of the old, you know, workers' cottage homes and wrapped all the wood siding with either metal or vinyl siding. And, you know, they didn't tear it off, but they just kind of hid it because it's easier. You don't have to paint it. It doesn't rot as much. But then as someone's purchased it and they want to, you know, invest a lot of money into it, restore it, they're tearing off that old siding, and all the old woodwork and detail work is still there. You can see the ghost marks from where the old porch was. So I'm sure they'll build a porch that'll extend off that house. But, you know, just really exciting to see things like that. So what I did was go through a lot of Google Street View, where every time they come to the area, it logs that time. So you can go back and see your home or different streets over a 20-year period or 10-year period and see it 5 or 6 different times to see how it's changed. So this is the 800 block of West Washington Boulevard. You know, you've got 3 homes in a row, all boarded up. No one's living there, in decline. One's got a tarp over the roof. And then 8 years later, you know, they're all lovingly restored. I think the one on the left probably sold in like the $300,000, $400,000 range. Landscaping, they're owner occupied, just a huge visual change. And one thing too even is, you know, Washington and Jefferson Boulevard, you get 19,000 people that travel that every single day. So it's either the last thing you see as you pass through downtown, or it's the first thing you see as you come around the tennis courts and you enter downtown Fort Wayne. So it's kind of greatly improved the entrance gateway into Fort Wayne, and kind of either your first impression of what Fort Wayne's going to be like if you're coming into town there, or it's, you know, maybe would leave a bad taste in your mouth if you had just seen block after block all boarded up. You go 2 blocks ahead, then on Washington Boulevard, and I think this is like 2011, 2012, kind of drab coloring, landscaping's run amok. Some of these are boarded up, some of them are just in rough condition. And then 8 years later, this bright, vibrant painting. You know, the one on the far right, I think it's a duplex with a big garage built out back. The other one's lovingly restored. Landscaping is all, you know, taken care of, bright, vibrant colors. So just another kind of exciting progress to see. You know, here's the block behind that on Wayne Street. You've got the big empty lot in the middle that started to develop as homes either would get demolished or they would burn down, and nothing would be built in its place, because in the 80s, 90s, you're not going to drop $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 to build a house in that area that's appropriate to the scale and size. You're gonna, if you have that kind of money, you're going to build it in another part of Fort Wayne. But you know, as interest and, you know, more people are knowing about downtown or want to live downtown, you can start to get that level of investment and restoration. So, you know, between the two, like the owners, I think, of the home on the left found pictures of what the old porch used to look like, and they had it rebuilt. You had a great home that kind of matches the scale and size and setback built in the middle. And then, yeah, that great wraparound porch on the third home on the right, just, you know, really, really changes the look of the area. And then the final kind of before and after I've got would be, this is 1133 Garden Street. And I think I'd heard it was owned by a hoarder, and it sat there and grew and grew. And to kind of, you could barely even see these giant pillars of the home because you had so much overgrowth. And then when it hit tax sale, someone purchased it and pulled out 5 40-yard dumpsters of just junk that was in the house, and, you know, lovingly restored it and made it into this beautiful grand statement that as you're coming around the tennis court, you look up and you see that, which is just, you know, such a change from, you know, a home that no one was living in before. And now you've got, you know, an owner occupied, you know, great property right there. And then even the house on the left too, kind of go from that darker drab color to this bright, vibrant green is really, really neat to see. So, a change like that, you know, you kind of think, how in 10 years did such a change take place? And then, you know, that kind of a change didn't take place all over Fort Wayne, happened in certain areas. And you maybe want to look at, you know, what are the factors that contribute to that? You know, what are the impacts of that? And so I think there's 2 key dates that when we look back 20, 30 years in the future, we'll say, you know, these are probably the 2 key dates as to why such a change took place. That's November 15th, 1984, and April 16th, 2009. Now, they kind of make more sense as I put some context to them, but the first one is that November 15th, 1984. And that would be when the first part of the West Central Local Historic District went into place. And what you had back then was essentially a group of neighborhood residents, you know, landlord or property owners who might not have lived there, but were behind seeing protections put in place for the West Central area. And I'll kind of cover what a local historic district is if you don't know what it is in a few slides from here, but it was kind of putting this local historic district protections over about 170, 180 homes that I think, you know, was the start of progress. What drove that progress was a lot of. So here's an overhead map from the late 1930s of West Central. You can see it's really densely packed. There's a ton of tree coverage in the area, but the key landmarks that you kind of point out would be, over here's St. Joe Hospital. So on Main Street would have been where their chapel was. Then there's the hospital before future additions. And then on that south side is the dorm. And then further on the west of there would be kind of the residential side of West Central, but it's the Rock Hill Fleming Mansion was one of the key landmarks. It was probably the biggest single property in West Central. That was a residential property, kind of spanned like 3 or 4 lots. It was this huge brick Gothic mansion that was first built by Mr. Rock Hill, who was like a state senator or state congressman, and then went on to serve in Congress. The Rock Hill Street, I think, had a large family that the name kind of carried forward, but just built this beautiful grand home. And then obviously through the decades, as downtown declines, that property also started to fall into decline because it's so big that it requires a lot of upkeep, a lot of care, a lot of maintenance. So I've talked to some people who do remember seeing the property when they were, a teen or in their early 20s, and they said it had like a ballroom on the 3rd floor, and you could then go up to the cupola on the top, and you could see down to the St. Mary's River from it. If it was still in West Central, even if it had been boarded up all those years ago, I think someone would have bought it by now and restored it, and it probably would have been, one of the most grand homes in the entire West Central neighborhood, or even Fort Wayne. Just would have been outstanding. But so it was located right there at the intersection of Westbury Street and Rock Hill Street. If you guys know where Sheridan Court's kind of that S apartment complex. So it was just kind of a half block further west. But as the nurses who owned, or the nuns who owned St. Joe Hospital, they need more space. The hospital's growing. You've got kind of this declining neighborhood. You've got abandoned properties that maybe they can buy at tax sale or buy very cheap. They ended up purchasing the lot where that home was, demolishing it, and then putting a parking lot there for, I think, hospital staff and then other people who might have needed the parking lot. And that happened in I think the like 1962, 1963. It was just really upsetting for the neighborhood. This is a satellite photo from, I think, like the early 90s, but it shows some of the changes that happened in the mid-1980s that spurned West Central residents to LHD protections in place. And that would be, right there's the St. Joe Hospital and then that nurses dorm. But in the 1980s, they then purchased another kind of half block, built that parking garage. They purchased the entire block of the 800 block of Westbury and Jackson Street, and either demolished all those homes. I think 1 or 2 were saved. But it was just kind of this further encroachment of downtown coming into West Central, buying up properties that are abandoned or really cheap, and then removing them. But at that time, where the Rock Hill Mansion was, there was actually 3 homes that were saved and moved to that location. And I know Arch was really, really involved in the preservation and saving of these properties. The one on the right, kind of the boxy one, wasn't in that block of Westbury, so they moved it over 1 block, and then it's the Struntz Sponhauer home that was in East Central. It was moved through downtown and then put in its location where it currently is. So that was kind of the start of a lot of that, maybe saving of homes or the back and pushing against the hospital and all the demolitions that were occurring. And then, past 2-3 decades, those homes have really been reinvested in, loving owners put in them, and they look fantastic today. We wouldn't have had them without Arch and neighborhood residents really fighting to keep those properties in place. So after 1984, where the residents voted to have that one LHD expanded from Main Street to West Washington Boulevard, the next year they get West Washington Boulevard down to Jefferson Boulevard. So you can see the 1984 LHD protections, the 1985 expansion area, and then just in this past year, we added 55 homes to that area, kind of down in the Electric Works south of Jefferson Boulevard area, to further kind of be a buffer. And I'll talk about how those protections save homes and prevent further loss. So if your home is in an LHD, that means at least at some point, at least 51% of the property owners on the tax title or on their property records voted in favor of having local historic district protections put over their area. And so if you have like 170 homes in an area, you need to get at least 51% of signers to sign on to say we want these protections in place. You know, what they create then is the Historic Preservation Commission and review by local historic preservation staff who are going to look at, you know, if you want to demolish a porch or you want to build a new porch, or, you know, you buy an empty lot in an LHD and you want to build a new home, you know, they're going to review your plans before any building permits are issued, and the commission or the staff, based on the level of the project, will review your plans and give you a certificate of appropriateness or ask for revisions or decline you outright. But what that does is putting the extra step in place to have a historic preservation review before any demolition or any new construction goes into place helps preserve that character of that area and make sure that things that don't fit in the area or detrimental changes aren't made to a property. And probably the biggest thing during those 80s, 90s, and early 2000s would be the ability for the Historic Preservation Commission to step in and really kind of stop demolition. So the Historic Preservation Commission can put like a 1-year hold on a demolition order. During that time, they can try to find a new purchaser to say, you know, hey, I know you're going to demolish that lot because the house is falling down, but what if we find someone from the community who wants to buy that property, take it off your hands, and then they're going to save it? It really, really helps keep that loss of property from happening. So, you know, here's the thing, you know, like a, you know, old brownstone, and then, you know, historic protections help keep, you know, your neighbor from painting just like a horrendous neon green or something that doesn't fit the character and history of that area. I mean, West Central is full of brightly colored, vibrant homes, but it just keeps, you know, really outrageous changes from happening. And it also helps keep historic elements like, you know, porches, spindles, the old windows, you know, from being lost over time to where a lot of the historic character of the home is gone over incremental changes over a long period of time. So to kind of counterbalance what happened to West Central versus East Central during that same kind of time period after the 1980s, in East Central, I think this photo was taken in 1968 or 65. You can see on the far right side, if you're unfamiliar with the area, that's where Indiana Tech campus is. But, you know, you've got a fully dense neighborhood, really, really similar to West Central, with a lot of the same historic homes, a lot of the workers' cottages and working class area. But then after that decline in the 50s, 60s, you had a lot of home loss. I mean, you look in that north section, especially north of Washington and Jefferson, and you have almost entire blocks that are just, you know, decimated. And that would be from the city coming in and putting a, you know, demolition order on a property that is falling apart and no one's taking care of it. Or I think there were buyouts to where they would remove blighted properties to kind of hopefully improve the look and feel and safety of an area by, you know, removing blighted properties. But what that really caused is just a lot of empty, you know, there might be 1 or 2 or 3 homes where there used to be a dozen or 18. So yeah, and I chose this photo from the area just because I think this is on East Wayne Street, and you look at that home, that's like an exact copy of the home I've got, and there's probably 4 or 5 other copies in West Central during that same time, and they were in similar conditions. But, you know, the fact that demolition was kind of taken off the table helped save them for a time when they could be renovated. So I think this is, yeah, 829 West Jefferson Boulevard, right next to Emmanuel Lutheran Church. It was in a pretty rough shape at that time, you know, covered in grass and moss. I think the church bought it and actually did the initial renovation work then to save it and put it back on the market so they could get a single family or someone to move into it. But, you know, on the left, that's actually that home today from where it was previously. And then we've got my house in the middle, and then another one on the right. And there's probably 5 or 6 other copies of that. So it's just really cool to see if you can save and preserve that home and then that block. You know, maybe further down the line, there's going to be that economic drive in the area or the financing to where you could save it. But I really think, you know, one thing that helps this lot is that you've got all those other homes there. And if you only had the one house sitting there and you didn't have historic protections, so it couldn't be demolished, you know, it makes it so much more likely that someone's going to be uninterested in stepping in and saving it.
but that's not to say that West Central didn't still have home losses after the LHE protections went into place, because they only went into place basically north of the train tracks and west of Van Buren Street. So a lot of West Central that extended into downtown did see significant losses over the past couple decades. So you've got West Jefferson Boulevard on the north side, and I think this place will start to look more familiar. But over time, you had the Lincoln Insurance parking lots start to creep into this area, and where the Botanical Gardens were built, you started to lose blocks of kind of middle class workers' cottage, 1.5 story, 1,400 square foot homes due to just the area divesting and then going into disrepair. And then downtown kind of growing and creeping into the neighborhood. So as you kind of watch the blocks progress over time, you're losing 20, 25 homes. Bit. So, here's today where you've got the Cityscape Flats are built, the Tin Cap Stadium's built, but a lot of the homes that used to be in the area are no longer there. Kind of paradoxically a bit though, I think that other date of the two that are the most important to West Central and downtown Fort Wayne's history, I think is April 16th, 2009, which would be the opening night of the new Tin Cap Stadium. Opens to a sellout crowd of 8,500 people, and it kind of signifies this rebirth period for downtown Fort Wayne. They moved the stadium downtown to get people to move downtown and create interest and kind of create this area where if we can get more housing in the downtown area, more restaurants, maybe people want to come back downtown. And it just really kind of started this snowball of progress to where, you had Harrison Square apartments and the hotel and the stadium built. You've got the landing, you've got Riverfront Phase 1, and then to the west of that, you'll have Phase 2 and Phase 3 in the next couple of years. And these are all within the West Central neighborhood boundary. In addition to that, you had the new Lutheran Hospital being built, Ashbrook Ridge, the Westbury development, everything that's going to happen with Chuck Surak and all of the Perfection Bakery area. And St. Francis moves their, I think, like digital media and music recording campus to downtown Fort Wayne. And then obviously Electric Works. I think some people think that Electric Works really kickstarted a lot of the revitalization in West Central, but it really just added more fuel to what was already this rolling ball of progress and investment. It just really sped up what was already a lot of change happening in the area. One thing I did think was interesting though would be if you could go back in the 1980s and let the people know who were really upset about all the demolition work happening by the nuns in St. Joe to West Central, that now St. Joe's being demolished. So just kind of like a change of what's happened in the area. But I think a lot of that progress that's happened in the past decade in West Central boils down to kind of these three principles that seem to fuel a lot of that investment and change. And it's kind of the confluence of community and historic preservation, where we've got a lot of residents who have always, for the past, probably since West Central's founding, been really, really invested in historic preservation. And when there's community meetings about a new development or home changes, the neighborhood's really on it and they're interested. They want to know what's going to happen to it. We also have the historic Home and Garden Tour. This year is going to be the 40th year of the Home and Garden Tour. And that has just been, a huge event each year that brings about 2,500 to 3,000 people into West Central. And it has a lot of really positive effects. It celebrates for West Central as being this area where there's historic homes. Kind of people in the community know West Central as being, the place where you can go and see historic homes and properties. The event, especially for those first kind of 30, 35 years, it would bring in, $10 or $15 or $20,000 that the neighborhood would then use. It was kind of the Save a Home Fund. So, I've been told they would try to save up 30 or 40 or 50,000 in the West Central coffers, so that if they heard that one of those big grand homes that's been sitting vacant for 30, 35 years is up for demolition, they could spend 30,000 and then stabilize that home, maybe put a new roof on it, and then find a buyer for it. And so that was, the benefit of having these people come in, buy tour tickets, come through West Central. You could kind of get this war chest of funds that you could use then to preserve and save homes. I plotted on a map, if you have about 10 to 12 homes on the tour each year for 39 years, you can see really the geographic spread of how many homes end up being on the tour, which is really, really neat. And one thing that kind of shows the progress of the neighborhood is really kind of south of Jefferson. It's not been until the past 8-9 years that a lot of those dots have shown up on there. So you can see kind of the extent of where tour quality homes have been occurring and reinvestment happening to where people want to put their houses on the tour. So it's great that each year we get all these new homes on the tour that have been recently remodeled or redone. Another big driver for what's been happening in West Central, I think, is just the downtown area and all of its progress with new residents coming in. The 2010 census showed that there were, I think, 1,014 residents living in the downtown census tract, which is just, I think, on the east side of Broadway. From Broadway kind of to Ewing Street is the downtown census tract. And then if you go and look at everything that's been built downtown over the past 12 years, and then everything that's currently in construction, so like the new Riverfront apartments, Electric Works Phase 2 apartments, the Pearl, all these new things, by I think 2024, when the last of these projects is done, it'll add, over that past kind of 14 years, 1,478 new units to downtown. And so if you kind of think, well, 1.5 people per unit, that's 2,217 people new in downtown Fort Wayne. And what that helps drive then is people want to go to, those people need to eat. They need to go to coffee shops. They want to go to a entertainment venue. They want to walk up and down the streets, and makes downtown more lively, which draws more people in. They want to kind of live in that, bigger city, urban environment, and it just kind of creates this fuel, because then they come downtown, they shop at the shops, they want to move downtown. That creates demand. You get new housing complexes that supports more businesses and more restaurants downtown, and it's just this really positive cycle. And I think that also benefits West Central, because now people who have been living in the neighborhood can walk to these new restaurants, new shops. There's new job opportunities coming into the area. And then finally, just the confluence of historic preservation and economic development. So when the area does progress and people are moving in and investing in homes, that you've got the historic protections in place to make sure that you're not losing the historic character of the area as people come and invest and move into the area. But that's where I wanted to dive kind of deeply into the economic data. And this is stuff I've just been able to put together through a lot of the publicly available resources, data sets from the county assessor's office, from a lot of like online property searches. So, like Connie said, all throughout Fort Wayne, you've had a lot of, the average price of home sales has gone up. It's gone up pretty significantly. And so before I looked at West Central, I want to get kind of a baseline of how they were going throughout the community. And so I chose the Cherry Hill neighborhood up by Maple Crest and St. Joe. You're able to put like a geographic kind of wrap around those homes. And here's examples of the homes. They're usually in the $300,000, $400,000 range. Definitely suburban area. And you can plot what those homes sold for from 2010 up until I think the past month. And if you plot them on a map and you exclude any kind of one-off incidences or foreclosures, you kind of start to get this trend line of this urban neighborhood, how sales progressed. Average of 13 homes sold in 2010, they sold for $328,000. If you looked this past full year 2021, the average sale price of 28 homes was $412,000. And these past 2 years have been just huge boons across the city for sale prices. So in that area, it's been a 26% increase in the average sale price of a home. And then if you want to look at more of a middle class, closer to the average sale price of a home in Fort Wayne, I chose the Indian Village neighborhood. I lived there with my wife before we moved to West Central. Great neighborhood, kind of 1940s, 1950s is when it starts to grow and develop and be built. And if you plot, I think there were 230 sales in that time period. You get of 23 sales in 2010, average of 84,000. And then this past full year, the average sale price is $114,000. So 72% increase. It's about 60,000 in additional sale price that each home on average is accruing over these past few years. And a lot of that increase is in the last 2 years. So, understanding kind of broadly what's going on in the community, probably somewhere on average between 30 to 60, 70% increase in home sale prices. I started to look at the West Central data. And the way the assessor's office has it is they've got, for the area in the LHD, they've got it broken into 2 sections. One is west of Van Buren and north of Jefferson Boulevard. And when you plot that data, and you've kind of got like a mix of some of the medium to larger workers' cottages, and you've got a lot of the big grand homes are kind of all mixed in that area. A lot of the big grand ones on Wayne and Berry and those side streets, and then some of the workers' cottage properties on Washington and Jefferson, but they're all kind of mixed around. What that data starts to look like is this massive curve that starts kind of around the middle of the last decade, to where I took the average of probably those 300 sales, and you have an average sale in 2010 of 62,500, and the last 2 years it's been 300 to 302,000 for the average sale. And I think 2011, that's 35 homes. The average is about 300,000. So just this meteoric rise of the average sale price of homes. You look at that area then south of Jefferson Boulevard, Wilt Street, Lavina, it's around the Electric Works area, north of train tracks. So it's a mixture of kind of the smaller workers' cottages. There's a number of it's either kind of like rougher, or just so a lot of abandoned houses in the area, a lot more vinyl siding. A lot of that economic progress and reinvestment still hasn't happened in that area. But what you get there is, essentially before 2016, I think there were 2 homes that sold at or above 100,000. And then you look at 2018 moving forward, and more than half are selling above 100,000. You've got 200,000, 250, 300, $400,000 sales. So the average of the homes sold in 2010 is about 25, 26,000, and it stays that up until it hits 2020, 2021, and it goes to 237, 240,000. Part of with the redevelopment and preservation of homes, they've sat vacant for so long because a bank wouldn't loan someone money. If you want us to go in and save a historic home and redevelop it, unless you had all that cash in your pocket, in your bank account to do that saving. A lot of times in the 90s, early 2000s, if you took them and said, I want to redevelop this 4,000 square foot home on West Wayne Street, they'd say, well, I look in the property records, no home is sold in that area anywhere close to that value, since 1960s, 1950s. So you couldn't get loans to do the kind of saving and preservation of these homes. And a lot of them were vacant. A lot of them were in really, really rough condition. And it isn't until you start to get this slow creep that turns into kind of a tidal wave of homes selling on average in that $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 range, are you able to get loans in order to do a lot of the work that's needed to save these huge homes with the slate roofs and 500 or 100 windows throughout the house and stained glass everywhere. You need comparable sales in order to save a home like that that's just sitting vacant, and it's been sitting vacant for decades. So, just one example of kind of the absurdity or just the wild increase of home sale prices in the area. Here's 912 West Wayne Street, kind of cute little home that's 2 in on the 900 block of West Wayne Street. And back in 2015, it sold for $35,000. And then you look at Google Street View, there's some work being done to the outside of it. In 2018, it sells for $170,000. And then there's more progress and work on it, and it sells for $363,000 in 2019. And then it sells again in 2021 for $450,000. and had the same realtor each time. So he made a killing selling the same house, so much. And, there's another one too, where there's a empty lot on the south side of Rock Hill Street by Electric Works that someone on the neighborhood board bought, in 2011 for $7,000. And then it sells 2 years later for $75,000, and then it just sold this year for $160,000 for a lot. And I think it's got a garage on the back side, but someone still needs to build a home on that lot, and it's selling for $160,000 when someone bought it for $7,000, 5 or 6 years ago. And if you guys are ever curious and you want to do this in your own neighborhood, if you go to the county assessor's website, you can go and click on that comparable sales tag, and it gives you an Excel spreadsheet of all the properties in your area, and you can see kind of how your own area is trended. But the county assessor's office uses properties like they kind of map an area. They say, as home sales change or increase, we're going to use the data from this area to trend property tax assessments, because they can't send someone out to everyone's home each year to see, how much has this property increased. They basically take an initial assessment of the property, the size, square footage, condition it's in, and then we'll trend it based on comparable sales in the area. And those comparable sale maps are those maps I showed you before I was able to get. So it's the north side of Jefferson, it's the South Will area, and then there's the area south of the train tracks that's grouped in with a lot of Michigan Avenue in the area south of that, south of Taylor Street. But so the one positive of that is, as Wayne and Barry and Washington really started to develop and trend, it didn't affect the property taxes of people living south of Jefferson Boulevard. It was kind of mitigated to its own area. But then once, the area south really starts to progress, it starts to trend all those properties similarly with comparable sales. So I've got data on that. And, there's no publicly available spreadsheets that you can get of assessed values of every property in an area. You basically have to build it from scratch. So I was able to go in online to individual property tax records and manually basically build Excel spreadsheets of 474 properties. There were, in the area north of the train tracks, there were 474 I could find records on of the past 12 years, their assessed property value and how much they paid in property taxes. And then there were 45, 46 properties that there's no complete data on that I had to leave out because it would skew numbers, or maybe they were owned by the city as a tax, repo property that there's just no data on. But with that, you start to see some, really obvious trend lines that grow. And the easiest way to think of it would be looking at the east-west streets. Because if you look at like a north-south street, like a Rock Hill or Jackson, the north side of the neighborhood typically started property values and saw earlier redevelopment than the south side. So if you look at Main Street, but then Berry Street, Wayne Street, and then in yellow, it's Washington and Jefferson, and then in red, it's Wilt, Lavina, and Jones Street, you can start to see these trend lines of when assessed property values that property taxes are based on started to change. And I was able to build this grid basically looking at the total of all the properties I could find on those streets, how their combined assessed property values changed over time. But in graph form, so West Berry and West Wayne Street really started to change 2015, 2016. That's when a lot of the sales of some of the redeveloped homes started to hit the trending, and the assessor's office took that and really started to increase the property values, or started to recognize that property values were significantly increasing. And you can see they've about doubled or more than doubled between 2015 and 2020. And then about a year or two later, 2016, 2017, you start to see that similarly on Washington and Jefferson. Talking with realtors, talking with people who have lived in the neighborhood for a while, typically if someone in the market that wants to move to West Central, wants to buy, I think everyone likes Wayne and Berry, especially because it's got the big, grand, beautiful old homes on it, and it's off of the main, Jefferson and Washington Boulevard with high traffic. But as those start to price out of a lot of people's price range, they start looking at, Washington and Jefferson, and maybe I can buy a house there and, do a big fix up and then live there. And so that starts to trend Washington and Jefferson. And then finally that south area in red, Wilt Street, Lavina Street, Jones Street, which are just kind of on the other side of the electric works development, they stay really, really constant as all that change is occurring because it's in a different tax bracket until 2019, 2020, and that's when it starts to spike. And it starts to spike more rapid than the other ones did, mostly because you got a lot of speculation. People are buying on electric works because they know it's a done deal and they see that how much that's going to impact that area, and you're going to have all these medium to higher wage earners that are going to want to move to the area, younger people, and so you see this big trending. So that's what it kind of looks like, and it matches that north to south. The northern area really starts to increase in assessed value first, then the middle area, and then the south area. And then if you kind of did like a heat map of where that is, in that 10-year time span, how much an area or a block has changed to where in that dark green, almost black color, that's a single property that's increased in assessed value $300,000. And so you'll get a block, that north middle block, that one block probably increased 1.2, 1.3 million in assessed value during that same time period. And then it's lower on the south side because they started out at lower property values, and a lot of that trending still hadn't taken place. And so I think you can see this shows the average assessed value of properties in on the east-west streets on the left, and then on the north-south streets on the right. But you can see, so the average home on Berry Street increased in assessed value about 109%. But I mean, Lavina Street, there's 13 properties, so there's not a lot of homes, so one or two can skew it. But the average assessed property on Lavina Street increased by 329% over that 10-year time period, and probably just in the last 2 or 3 years, because it remained pretty constant before that. So if you take all 460, 470 homes, the average increased assessed value spread out across all the properties is 102,000. But it really skews a lot more in the north and less in the south. And then if you combine all that assessed value increase over that 10-year period, that total combined assessed value that was added to those same 480 homes is $48.5 million. So, just this huge increase based on developments happening downtown and more interest in people wanting to move downtown, and more repairs, renovations happening to homes, a lot of them being vacant or abandoned homes that are finally having someone who could purchase them and put the kind of care and investment into them that hasn't been able to for the past few decades. Similarly, assessed values go up, property taxes are going to go up. And I was able to take those same property cards and if you take all property taxes on their home for a few years, and you start to get that accrued bill of all the delinquencies, I took those values out. So I basically, as if everyone had paid all their property taxes at the level they were supposed to each year on all these properties, you can see how much it's increased. And it's a little bit hard for me to see it, but the amount collected totally of all 477 homes in 2011 was about $550,000 back in 2011. Those same homes, the property taxes collected from them here in 2020 or 2022 is $1.5 million. So I've got a slide later, but the total property values, or the total property taxes collected from Jefferson Point, is about $1 million. So essentially, it's almost like a new Jefferson Point was built smack dab in the West Central neighborhood in terms of the amount of property taxes collected in our area that go to fund schools, fund the airport, fund fire trucks. But I do know that it's become kind of the worst time of the year when the property tax bills go out to neighborhood residents, because it goes up 20, 30, 50, 60% a lot of times, because it's trying to catch up to what the actual sale prices of homes are in the area. And here's just another thing that looks at, I think this is from 2018 data, but if you broke Fort Wayne up into just acre-sized plots of land, and then if you mapped out on those acres how much in property taxes were collected per acre, you can see, it's interesting because you can see like Illinois and Jefferson Boulevard, because you can see where like the Kroger and Lutheran Hospital is on the south side, and then you go up a little further, you can see Jefferson Point, and then you get into downtown, you can see just massively how much in property taxes is collected by the county in the downtown area. And it's a lot of times because you'll have apartment complexes that have 60, 70 people there, that it's all put on like a half acre or an acre lot, just a massive amount of property taxes. But you also look at that whole left side of the left picture is just the West Central neighborhood, and some of those individual blocks are paying between I don't know, like 12 homes, they're paying $70,000, $80,000 in property taxes, because each one is in that $4,000 or $5,000 range. And that's super efficient for the city, because you got to think the city has to service the entire, the entire Fort Wayne area, to put water lines, to put street lights out there, to put trash collection. But a suburban neighborhood where you've got maybe larger lots and they're more spread out, or this grid pattern in West Central and a lot of the other legacy neighborhoods, it's so much more efficient because it's just this square, you have asphalt concrete, or you have one sewer line running through there. It's closer to the sewer filtration plant. So you just have these really, really efficient properties for the city and county that just are producing a massive amount of property taxes. Because I think people in the suburbs will say, well, I've got this big expensive home, we really help fund a lot of the city operations. That's where a lot of the property taxes come from. But given how much goes into putting street lights out that way, putting sewer lines so many miles outside of town, putting new streets to connect those new neighborhoods in, it's really the old legacy neighborhoods that are producing a lot of that efficient property taxes for the city. Just kind of like an interesting thing to see. Yeah, here's that where Jefferson Point, about $1 million in property taxes each year, and then just between kind of 2016 and 2022, you can see how much the property taxes have increased in West Central. There are big human impacts though, because it is great if you love historic homes. Past decade's been almost universally positive, but West Central has, I think it's 1,500, 1,600 people that live in it, and not everyone's benefited by this huge change that's occurred over the past few years. And it kind of breaks into 4 categories, and you've got either homeowners or renters. And then of those, you've got middle and upper income people, and then lower income or fixed income residents. You can kind of look at what are the impacts on them. So if you're an upper middle income homeowner who's lived in the neighborhood, especially if you've owned your home more than the past 2-3 years and didn't just move in, you've benefited massively from how much your home has increased if you were to list it on the market and sell it today. Your property taxes are probably going up, and you probably cringe when you look at your property tax bill, but you're probably able to absorb that cost, and it's not a big impact. You look at your street, the abandoned house on the street is getting changed. I almost told my wife on Wilt Street, because I had to sell her on, moving there. She grew up, went to Homestead, grew up on the south side of town, so we had to have a house with a bigger backyard, but we found one on Wilt Street, and there's just, a lot of homes that had plywood screwed over the windows, and they were just vacant. And almost each year, the past 3 or 4 years, as we pick out, what's the worst house on the block or on our stretch of 4 blocks, that house almost definitely has sold and then been redeveloped and then is beautiful. And then the next year you pick out what the worst house is, and that seems to kind of flip and change too. So just the streets beautifying. There's more people living on the streets because you've got like a vacancy rate, at least 2-3 years ago, 30 or there's just a lot of vacant homes in the neighborhood, and a lot of those that are changing were vacant. But the nice thing too is if you've owned your home for a decent amount of time in your middle to upper income, that increase in equity, you can pull out of your home and then do an addition. You can build a new garage. You can make big changes to your home based on that increase in equity, where it's not really coming out of your pocket directly. On the flip side of that though, is if you're kind of a fixed or lower income homeowner, if you went and listed your home real estate market today, you would kind of get a pretty sizable windfall from probably what you bought it for 10, 15, 20 years ago. Maybe the mortgage is paid off and you could sell, if your home's in rough condition, still probably 160, 170, 180. But if you want to stay in the area and kind of, you love seeing the progress, you love all the neighbors, if you've got a fixed income or low income and you keep seeing your property back tax bill, like double or triple, essentially over a 10-year period, it starts to worry you that, man, am I getting squeezed out, or could I at some point get squeezed out, which is a definite concern. And you could always, access equity that's built into the home as it's increased and pull that out, or kind of like a reverse mortgage style that could help you incrementally afford to pay for the increasing property taxes. But, if it was already tight 10 years ago, if your water bill goes up by 10% or 5%, people get really, really upset. But if your property tax bill is going up by 100%, it's a big, big shock. On the flip side too, West Central has a lot of properties that are rental properties. And if you are a college student, young professional that loves living downtown, maybe you get an apartment. When you sign your lease, it's $650 a month, and then you get a letter from your landlord that, hey, it's going up by $150 a month. You can probably absorb that. And it's not going to impact you too much. You like living downtown. You like seeing everything improve. You like going down to the Tin Cap Stadium. And if it did price you out of the area and you go, I can't afford to pay $1,000 for this apartment, you could probably still pay to move out of that area, or like the cost of getting a moving truck and moving out isn't a huge impact to you. But if you are fixed or low income, it's hard to kind of do forward planning, or you're pretty concerned about, I know that my landlord's property taxes are going up and he needs to account for that in his, the amount he charges me monthly, or he might look at increasing values and say, hey, I'm going to get out of the landlord business and sell my property. And now you've got 2 or 3 apartment units where, the house is being sold. Maybe it's being sold to a single family buyer who wants to reconvert it. And then you've got to find a new place to live. And, it's already a tight housing market in downtown for rentals. And if you really like the area, all the rents are increasing. Leave your street and go a street over, the rents are increasing. So, we've had a lot of long-time residents of the neighborhood that have been in that, because you've got to think before 2010, if you've lived in West Central for 10, 20, 30 years, I talked to a landlord, he said he was the first one to cross the $400 a month mark for rent back in like 2002, 2003. He said he was almost crucified for, charging an exorbitant amount that was hard for people to continue to pay. And you got to think how much rents increase. You couldn't find a $400 a month apartment in West Central anywhere these days. And kind of just from that landlord's perspective, I know, understanding why rents are increasing, one component of it is going to be the increase in property taxes. And where residential, you're capped at 1% of your property value. So if your home's worth $100,000, the most you're going to pay typically is going to be $1,000 in property taxes that year. But if it's a rental, you're capped at 2% or $2,000. So, in this example, it would just be, between 2016 and 2022, if your assessed value increased from $40,000 to $171,000, which I pull these numbers off of like a de-identified home in the area, if your rent that you collected from that unit was $1,000 each month, or was it, yeah, $1,000 each month, your yearly amount of income that goes to pay the property tax on that home in 2016 was 6.7%. But that same amount of your income that then goes to property taxes in 2020 is 28%. So, a bigger chunk of a landlord's income is going to pay property taxes, and that's almost always something that gets passed on. So if that landlord wanted to keep the amount he paid of property taxes at 6.7% annually, he'd have to increase his rent from $1,000 to $4,267 to keep the amount he pays in property taxes each year capped at 6.7% of his total income. So obviously, they're making a little bit less, but they're passing on a lot of the expenses on in terms of rent cost. So if you look then at who's benefited, who's it been a mixed bag, and who's it been detrimental for, I think, almost certainly if you're a middle to upper income homeowner, it's been a positive decade. If you are, either a fixed to low income homeowner or a renter. It's been like a mixed bag, especially if you're on the homeowner side, lower income. You could still sell that property and relocate somewhere else, but obviously that you want to stay in that area. And then unfortunately for low income renters, you look at the next 10 years and it's a lot of unpredictability and the likelihood of rents increasing. So, just that's kind of the downside, or something that I think city officials, people need to be aware of. So, final thoughts, takeaways from this would be, to other areas in town that have historic properties, I think the biggest thing is putting LHD protections in place to even where if your area is still backsliding, or there's home values aren't to where someone can come in and redo the house to the level that it requires to kind of be brought back to its old glory days. If you put the protections in place, you won't have the demolition, and maybe in a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, it'll be at that point, just like West Central went through, and that could be saved, versus just having block after block of demoed homes. Have a neighborhood atmosphere of fighting to prevent demolition and loss to historic character. Just keep those things in place. So, because it kind of makes every area or part of Fort Wayne unique to have those historic characters. When you lose that, you can't really get it back. Having an attitude that mothballing a property, or if West Central didn't have a few decades of homes that were fully boarded up and looked kind of yucky, we wouldn't have these beautiful properties today. We would have just empty lots for the most part. And then, advocating, neighborhood leaders, advocating with the city that we need to have a place when we have big development, when an area rapidly improves in property taxes and property values. We need to have a plan in place so that people aren't displaced, that you can cap off property tax increases for low income or fixed income people so that people aren't displaced. And, I think the changes did happen in the last 4 or 5 years. Were really, really rapid. I don't know to what degree the city elected leaders and folks realize how big of a change has happened, or how much people's property taxes have gone up, but it is just something that we need to continue to have local leaders aware of. And then just other food for thought. If people are from other kind of historic parts of town, I did do a little dabbling into some of the data, and so for the old North Side neighborhood, you guys, there's been a massive increase, and there's that LHD, the local historic district on Columbia Avenue. And if you just look at the 118 sales on Columbia Avenue over the past decade, there's been a massive increase. And I think a lot of this too goes to, I know we got our Fort Wayne Historic Preservation staff, and just I hope the city realizes the return that having put investments and putting resources into saving Fort Wayne's historic properties has been for a return for the city, with having such good qualified staff to take a look at these things and advise on changes. And then likewise down in Williams Woodland, I think there's been 130 sales over the past decade, and there's been a really large rise there. Average Williams Woodland home was $32,000 back in 2010. I think the last year of sales has been 170,000, and just continue to increase. So it is great seeing a lot of historic areas all over town all increase, and it seems like historic areas in Fort Wayne have increased at a much greater rate than suburban or non-historic areas. So definitely something that someone could do a whole research paper on. Yeah, so a 404% average increase in the sale price of homes down in Williams Woodland. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tyler. That's a lot to absorb and to think about, but we have people here fully capable of asking good questions. And also the people who are watching online are invited to use the chat function to send questions in, and we'll have those relayed to us. Questions from our audience for Tyler? Yes.
Historic Preservation Commission business down in somebody wants to be able to walk up and touch it and feel the wood and not vinyl, even if it looks historic. Is there any truth to that? And if so, has it evolved to be more reasonable?
Okay, I am going to repeat the question so the people who are live streaming can be sure to hear it. The question is that it is known in the community, or believed to be true in the community, probably is true, that years ago, a homeowner who wanted to use a non-wood siding on the house that looked like wood and would protect the house, was told no by the Historic Preservation Commission, and that has created a sense in the community that people don't want to be in a local historic district, because then they will have to be painting their house all the time, as the questioner said, just so somebody can walk up to it and touch it and say, yes, this feels like wood. I am not the person who is qualified to ask that. We have our entire historic preservation staff here. I know from my interactions with them, they do everything they can to work with homeowners, and I will invite them to speak to that, or I will recommend that you speak with them afterwards, depending on how much nuance there is. Don, what do you feel comfortable with? Come, if you would, could you come up here and use the microphone? I'm sorry. Well, or I'll repeat what you say and condense it if you like. Okay, I am going to attempt to restate what okay, I will attempt to restate it for the people who are live streaming for the recording. Yes, there was a person who was told no vinyl siding, but it was for the structurally sound reason that it would have harmed the existing wood siding. In general, there are circumstances when non-wood is approved, and that can be when the wood is damaged to the point that it needs to be replaced, or when there is actually appropriate new construction involved in a historic district. Many of these products are paintable. They tend to hold paint, when done right, longer and better than wood. And I advise anyone who has questions about this to call our Historic Preservation Office and work with them and get details and further explanations. I hope I have not misstated anything. Okay, any more questions? So that's a yes and kind of answer. I hope you don't mind. Yes. Okay. This was a, okay, yeah. this was a comment that was reflecting on the figures that Tyler presented of all the value lines going up, up, up in the historic districts. And her observation that that being in a historic district obviously hasn't kept people from wanting to be there. And research has shown that one of the biggest attractions of owning property in a historic district is that your investment is better protected because you have much clearer expectations of what's going to be happening with the properties around you. And you can expect similar kinds and levels of investment as you are doing in your own property. Tyler, do you want to add to that?
I mean, yeah, a little bit. Like, to people that do want to put vinyl siding up, I understand that, but part of me always, chuckles a bit when someone says, like, I want to move to this historic area, and I want to move here because I love the historic character and feel of it. And then they're like, well, but I want to put vinyl siding up. And it's like, part of what makes it this historic character and feel is most of the fact that it's using these older building materials, older building styles that you're not just going to find in other areas. One economic thing too is just how many electricians, plumbers, drywallers, framers have, put their kids through college off of projects going on downtown and in West Central and other historic areas. I saw a stat where, and this is at least before the pandemic and when material costs went up greatly, but typically in new construction, the cost breakdown is 50% of the cost typically goes to material and 50% goes to labor. But on historic home restoration and revitalization, it's typically 60 to 70% goes to labor and 30% goes to materials. So, when you're paying for materials, a lot of that money goes to Lowe's, goes to Home Depot, goes to lumberyard, and a lot of that money exits town. But when you're paying labor, the plumber sends his kid to Bishop Dwenger, or the electrician lives down the street. And so that money stays in the community. So if Fort Wayne prioritizes, less expanding outside of the Fort Wayne boundaries and more, reinvesting in homes and neighborhoods in Fort Wayne, you're actually going to see a greater amount of that money stay in the community.
I've seen research about that too, and I thank you for using the word reinvestment, because that's what it is. We're reinvesting in our built heritage, and it pays us back in many different ways. Any more questions? I am not seeing any, but I see people who've been exposed to a lot of information. We will get a recording of this, and it will go up on the Arch website in more or less a week, depending on when I can fit it in, because I trust me, the History Center will get me the recording quickly, and then it becomes, it's on mine to do. But thank you all very much. Thank you to the members and donors of Arch who make this possible. Thank you to the History Center for being our host in this lovely Shields room. And thank you to Arch United and the Community Foundation of Greater Fort Wayne for supporting us. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you to you.